So, this is not my usual content, but I'm going to Norway in 2 days to make some more videos, and I want to get something out between my last video and then. So, I decided to have the most original video idea in the world, and that is a tier list, I know. But, to make it slightly more unique, instead of just ranking these metro stations for the DC Metro, I've decided to rank them based on how good they would be as a terminal. Yes, I know. This isn't an original idea either. I've seen a video, or someone did this for the New York City subway, but in that video it was ranking the stations that are actually terminals, and not every station based on how good it would be as a terminal. Just how the terminals are at being terminals. But for my video, we're going to do things differently, and we're going to go through every single one of the 98 metro stations. So, without further ado, here we go. Addison Road. Number 1, because these stations are in alphabetical order. Addison Road gets a B tier from me. It is a typical terminal station layout for the DC Metro. It actually used to be the terminus of the Blue Line up until 2004, when the extension to Largo opened. So, it worked. It, at the time, actually, didn't have tail tracks. Well, still doesn't, because those tracks are used for trains. But I'll open the track map so you can see better look. The crossover is right here, before the station. And that meant that trains could use either one of the 2 island platform tracks and then just turn around and go back out. So as a terminus, it would be a pretty good station. If there was a service disruption, say you had to close Morgan Boulevard for some reason, then you could turn trains at Addison Road. Perfectly fine, yeah. But still, no tail track, so you can't really store trains. No pocket track, so again, can't store trains, but you get what you get. I think it would still be decent, but could do better. Next station, Anacostia. That gets C tier for me, because it is similar to Addison Road in its design, but actually slightly different. If I go back out onto this track map here, and I scroll down to Anacostia here, you can see that the crossover is actually on the south side of the station. So if trains were coming in from the south, it would work perfectly fine. If trains were coming in from the north, it would not, which is how it was. Trains used to have to use what would have been tail tracks down here to turn around, and they would come in from the north, unload on this platform, and then either switch tracks here and then turn around, or go straight, turn around, then switch tracks, and come. But either way, they'd come in this platform, exit this platform. But if trains are coming from the south, it wouldn't be fine. That's something I should mention for Addison Road. It would be similar. So I might actually, if trains are terminating from Largo for some reason, Addison Road, they could still do it. It would be a bit more tricky. So that's something I didn't consider. So I might actually immediately change my rating. So I think I might then bump, I don't know. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm going to bump, Addison Road down to a C. And then maybe actually bump Anacostia up to a B, because what this map doesn't do that good of a job showing is that the tracks are actually a lot closer together for the tail track section at Anacostia, on the south end at least. So the crossover, so what that means is that crews can essentially move between trains a lot more smoothly. Both these stations do have crew rooms as well, so again, changing my mind as I'm recording this. This is one take, so bumping both up to a B. We're sticking with that, and we're laying that down. That's the solid, not changing, static. Okay. Next station, Archives. Archives is not great. If we go over to a track map, Archives doesn't have any crossover or turning track. The nearest one is this one down here at L'Enfant Plaza. So you could technically use that as a crossover for Archives. And it could work fairly, like you could still do that. It would just be a really long stretch of like essentially single track. Well, you could use, well, it's not really single track because you could use both tracks, but you could only get one train in on each section. So yeah, you're essentially still operating like a regular terminal, just the crossover is way over there. So that does dock a few points from it. Archives, I'm not sure if I want to do C or D, because it doesn't have its own crossover, but it can still use the L'Enfant one, and it's not as bad because of how close those two stations are compared to other stations on the system. So I'm going to actually then, because, again, it's not that far of a distance, I'm going to bump it up to C. Arlington Cemetery, let's see. Arlington Cemetery, right here. I'm going to give this a, I might bump Archives down to a D actually, and then put Arlington Cemetery in C tier. You might be wondering, well, why would I do that? And that's because it's not great to have a terminus station that has side platforms, because that makes it a lot harder to switch directions. Like if you don't know what platform the next train is leaving on, it's a lot easier to wait it out when the two tracks share a platform than when it's two separate platforms. So that's why I'm bumping that down. Again, similar situation with the crossover to Addison Road and Anacostia. That's something you're going to see a lot of. I'm guessing this B tier is going to be very full. Ashburn, new Silver Line station. Not that new now, but new in my heart still. Oh, there's an inset for it. Oh, where is that? Is that? I didn't know there was an inset. Makes sense because it's so far out. Okay, it is, whoa. Screen recorder just opened up. Okay, it's down here. Down by, what is this? Alexandria, for some reason. They put the inset here. Why is it highlighted? Go away. Okay, Ashburn. This gets an A tier. You have tail tracks, crossover on both ends. So, great terminus design. Only thing that would bump this up to S is if the yard was like right there. So S tier, I'm saving for like the best of the best. So I think only like maybe one or two stations might actually get it, but we'll see. Okay, Ballston. Think Arlington Cemetery, but underground. Also used to be a terminus, which made sense because trains were terminating from this direction, but in this we're assuming, based on my rankings, on if trains are coming from either direction. So Ashburn, you obviously can't do that because the tracks don't continue past it. Well, they do for the tail tracks, but not past that to another station. So, if we're considering both directions, again, yeah, it's going right next to Arlington Cemetery in C tier. Benning Road. Benning Road, immediate D tier. No, F. Because the next nearest crossover is 2 stops down Addison Road, and the next nearest point you could turn a train is at the pocket track, but that's after the merge with the orange line. So that brings in a whole new set of complications there. So, my dog just yawned. Alright, back to the recording. Again, one take. So, because this pocket track is after the merge, it's obviously not a great situation for you to turn a train here. So this is why usually when you have these kinds of closures, when you have closures on that, or construction on that section, Benning Road and I think Capitol Heights 2 are usually closed when there's construction on this aerial segment here, because no crossover, no easy way to turn trains doesn't involve the pocket track. So, and the whole merging situation just brings issues with it. So yeah, Benning Road, F tier. Bethesda. Bethesda gets, on this list, let's see. As much as I hate to dog on Bethesda Station, Bethesda gets a D tier next to Archives. No crossover. No. Because you have the ones at Friendship Heights and at Medical Center are on the same end of those two stations as Bethesda. Like they're both on the Bethesda facing side of those two stations. But again, Bethesda gets a lot of single tracking because if there's ever a disruption in these tunnels, they'll usually just use those crossovers, and that means, and because of the way they're positioned, that means Bethesda is usually the only station that has to suffer from it, because Medical Center and Friendship Heights are usually fine because they have the crossover. But yeah, Bethesda gets D tier. I might actually bump that down to F. No, I'm keeping it in D, because Benning Road is substantially worse. What's next? Braddock Road. Braddock Road, is it another one of the B tier stations? I forget. Yes, it is. Braddock Road is yet another B tier station here. Same situation as Addison Road and Anacostia. So yeah, B tier. Branch Avenue. This, if I'm remembering right, this has the potential to be our first S tier. Because if I'm, yeah. Yard, crossover. Ooh. Nope, I'm putting that in A tier. You might wonder why, because, I mean, it has tail tracks, it has crossovers on both ends, even though this one is staggered. But I'm not counting the tail tracks and the yard as two separate things, because the tail tracks are the approach tracks into the yard. So if you store a train there, you have to route the trains in the yard around it. So for now, Branch Avenue gets A tier. Brookland, I think for like 2 weeks, this was actually the terminus of the Red Line. When the phase opened to Silver Spring, it actually opened from Rhode Island Avenue one stop to Brookland first. And stations are kind of close. The reason it's possible is kind of because the Rhode Island Avenue crossover is a bit far back from the station, so you could still use it for Brooklyn. So it's a similar situation to Archives. So I think I'm going to put them in the shared D tier. Actually, I might bump Archives up to C, and then put Brooklyn in C as well. Yeah, because, again, the crossover is pretty close for both of them. It's not that far. Capitol Heights is right next to Benning Road. It doesn't have a crossover. Usually also goes, you have the one at Addison Road there too. So I might put, and that's similar to like Bethesda, except Bethesda has one on both ends. But because there is a crossover like within a station from it, I'm going to move it up to D tier. Capitol South. Is that another similar thing? Ooh. Okay, so Capitol South, you have this Federal Center crossover you could use. But I don't think they would. I mean, no, I'm not sure if this would count for like the same distance as this. I think it is similar. And there is also no direct crossover on the other end, like there is at Bethesda. But that's, again, similar to Capitol Heights. So Capitol South and Capitol Heights go right next to each other in the D tier. Actually, no, because it's a similar distance to Archives. So I might bump Capital South up to C tier. Cheverly is interesting because it doesn't have a diamond crossover. It has a staggered one, which is usually the norm, but on metro systems it really isn't. Cheverly is also a side platform station, so, I mean, it has a crossover still. I feel like it being staggered doesn't really affect it too much, because you don't really have to use both of the switches at once at any point, so it being staggered just means the crossover is a bit longer, but, like, it's not that big of a deal. So Cheverly goes with Arlington Cemetery in the C tier. Clarendon. Again, the reason these stations aren't B tier is because, one, B tier would be way too full, and two, because they're side platform stations. Clarendon is, again, very similar situation. Clarendon, C tier. Cleveland Park. Cleveland Park's crossover is at Van Ness, so similar situation to those other stations we're talking about, Capitol South, Capitol Heights, Bethesda, similar to all those. But I think Cleveland Park is going to go down in D tier because the station spacings are starting to widen out at this point on the line. So it's pretty far too. It's not that far, but it's farther than Archives to L'Enfant. I can tell you that much. I think. They might actually be similar again. Ooh. Let me check. Because the track map's not that well, it is somewhat geographically accurate. Let's see. Van Ness, Cleveland Park is that. Oh yeah, no, it's farther. It's definitely farther. That is my dog again coming here and wanting to mess up the recording, but I'm not going to let her. Because we're going to keep going. One take. It's going to become the new thing for this whole video. I'm just going to be saying one take. Okay, anyway, College Park. College Park is another B tier station. One crossover, island platform. Typical. And I know I said another as if C tier isn't the most full tier, but B tier is definitely going to have it beaten by the end of the video. Columbia Heights. Ooh. Columbia Heights gets... Okay, so you might disagree with me for this one, because it's similar station distance, but I'm actually not going to do the C tier thing I did for Capitol South. And I'm actually going to put it down in D tier. And the reason is, yes, it's not that far of a distance to George Avenue, but it's the curves. The curves slow things down significantly. So that means trains take longer to go through that section. So, yeah, Columbia Heights D tier terminal. All right, Congress Heights. Congress Heights, yeah, down here. Similar situation to Bethesda, another D tier. Actually, basically same situation. Courthouse. Ooh, what? Courthouse is, for me, getting... You could use a Clarendon crossover, but... Yeah. So, Clarendon's kind of far, but you could use it, and that would be... You know what? I've changed my mind about this. I'm going to bump down Capitol South to a D tier, because I just thought about how that would work if you're not coming in from this end and you have to go all the way out. That would suck. So since we're considering both directions again, which I forgot about for that D tier. Same thing with Courthouse. Courthouse is D tier. So any station like that is getting a D tier. Brooklyn gets the exception, but that's because the Rhode Island Avenue crossover sucks. So, because it's too far from the station. Anyway, Crystal City. So any station with a situation like that, immediate D tier. Crystal City, same situation. Actually, no. You get bumped down further. I'm actually going to put that... Well, no, because the station basins are pretty close. But again, no direct crossover. I feel like Crystal City actually could use the National Airport pocket track to turn trains and the one at Pentagon City, but that's like on the other end. So you'd have to single track to get there if you're coming in from Pentagon City. Or you could come in from here, use the National Airport crossover, come back, or pocket track, come back. But if there's an issue at National Airport and that's the reason you have to turn trains, then you have to single track. So, ooh. And again, all these stations are pretty close to each other. Pentagon City, Crystal City, and especially Crystal City National Airport, that's a very close station spacing. But then again, simply for the reason that the crossovers are all the crossovers are within another station, like in National Airport, where the pocket track is the third track to the station, or at Pentagon City, where the crossover's on the other side of the station, where it's no longer in like the Crystal City zone. I'm putting that in an F tier, even though it's closer. The crossovers are literally closer to ones that I've mentioned for other stations that I've put in D tier. It's still getting below because, again, they're not really... At that point, you couldn't even argue that they're Crystal City crossovers because, again, other than Pentagon City, this is literally a track for a National Airport. Again, yeah. I'm going to stop now. So otherwise, I'm just rambling. Okay. Deanwood. That's out here. Deanwood... Basically, yeah. F tier. Right down there. Yeah. Not great. No crossovers. Nearest one on the other side of a station. Downtown Largo. This one. This is a good terminal. This is a A tier. This is a solid A tier. You have tail tracks. You have 3 tail tracks. And you have provisions here. If you look closely, those little gray things are actually like concrete provisions for expansion. If I go to Google Maps real quick, and I go over to Largo in satellite view, this will make sense. You can see these little concrete things here are those provisions for the expansion. Just wanted to go to maps to show you that. So I'm going to close out this tab because it's taking up a lot of my computer's resources. I'm using a laptop for this. Anyway, Largo, A tier, yeah. Dulles pains me as a terminal. Like, it is a painfully bad terminal. It's not even the worst one we've seen on this list, but because of how important of a station Dulles is, I keep forgetting Dulles has its inset that's way down here. It's all the way, yeah. But yeah, because of how important of a station Dulles is for the airport, like, it has crossovers. They're just so far from the platform. But then again, like, Dulles is, like, it's not that big of a deal, but Dulles is such an important station that I feel that alone, like, because it has crossovers on both ends. Again, yeah, but again, too far from the platform, really sharp curves to get there, which means trains move slowly. So that's a D tier. That, even though it has crossovers, that's a D tier. Just because it's Dulles. Like, you can't have a terminal design like that for Dulles. Dunloring, I think, is another. It's either a D or an F, if I'm remembering right. That's a crossover. That's the one for Vienna, so wouldn't really use that at that point. Just use Vienna. And Then there's the West Falls Church one, but like that's West Falls Church. So yeah, that's an F. It's also the really long station spacing there doesn't help at all. DuPont Circle. Without even looking at the map, I can tell you that's a C tier, but I'm just going to prove it to you to show. Crossover here. Side platforms. So Eastern Market, B tier. Don't ask how I know this stuff. I'm a transit nerd, okay? So crossover on this end, just one crossover, island platform, B tier. I'm telling you, this tier is going to catch up. East Falls Church, similar situation, actually, but it is the branching point for the orange and silver lines. So if you're coming in from this end, it's fine. If you're coming in from the other end, though, you could use this crossover to turn trains, and you could also, or you could use this one up here. But this one up here gives this long section, like, just this, puts this big gap here. So you'd probably use this one. It is a branching point, so I might have to deduct points for that and move it down to C. So my prediction might actually be wrong because I have to do all this moving because of transfer stations and their importance. Okay, Eisenhower Avenue. Eisenhower Avenue gets a solid F. Actually, I might give it a D because it has yard access. But there's no, but as a, well, no, it has yard access, but as a terminus, it's so close to Huntington, you might as well just use Huntington. Like, the crossover is right there, so just use Huntington. F. I might move some of these up in these D tier ones down to F. But I feel like, again, being a side platform station, Eisenhower Avenue is going to obviously get punished more for it, for being in that similar situation. What's next? Farragut North. Farragut North gets an A. Actually, I might, no, yeah, that's an A, because it has a pocket track, and it has this track connection to the blue, orange, silver, which means that if you needed to, like if you had some disruption in the tunnel under the river here, and you needed to like send less trains, you could split one of those lines in two. Like if you had a issue with this tunnel, and you didn't want to have like, and you didn't want to send the orange line trains through because it seems like Metro is now prioritizing the silver over the orange, which they should be because it has better land use and more ridership overall. So if you, especially now with the branch New Carrollton, but if you, again, have an issue here and you don't want orange line trains, you could split it into, have it short turn at like East Falls Church or maybe at Clarendon or Ballston. Again, using those mid-tier terminals there because the crossover's on the wrong end to do that. But anyway, and then you could have one of those, and you could have the eastern segment of the orange line run to New Carrollton, and then up here and turn at Farragut North using the pocket track here to store it so you can let a red line train Shady Grove pass through, and then back it back out onto the southbound, onto the northbound track going southbound, which you'd have to time really well, and then use the switch and then cross it over here. So yeah, you could do that, which is a really cool maneuver. But yeah, so that is A tier because that's, again, a pocket track. So you don't disturb service if you need to turn a train there. Like just one for, it's like a mechanical issue or something. Farragut West. We're right on it. So Farragut West right here. Again, the crossovers are Foggy Bottom and McPherson Square crossovers. And it's a side platform, so again, yeah, what I'm actually going to do now is any station that has a crossover that you couldn't call its own, that just doesn't have a crossover, you could call its own. Like, that's not like one that's in a bad location where it's just far enough away. I'm moving down. So, to F. So, Capitol Heights, Capitol South, Cleveland Park, Columbia Heights, Congress Heights, Courthouse. And then I might move Brooklyn down to D, because it also doesn't have a crossover, but it kind of does, because the Rhode Island Avenue one is like halfway almost. So yeah, again, one take video, so I changed my mind a lot, but I think that's how I'm going to do it from now on. Okay, what's next? Federal Center Southwest, B tier. Literally like copy paste Eastern Market. Crossovers on the same side too. See? Crossover there, crossover there. Like, it's literally copy paste. Federal Triangle. That's a C. Because again, the crossover is far back enough where it's a halfway between Smithsonian and Federal Triangle. So it's like a crossover for both of these two stations. So, yeah. It's just pushed a bit far back. So that's why I'm putting it in C. It would be a B if the crossover was closer. What's next? Foggy Bottom. Literally, again, copy-paste Federal Center and Eastern Market. B. Forest Glen. That, using the logic I use for Federal Triangle, that's a C. And it's just because the crossover is pushed a bit too far back for Forest Glen. Like, this shows as being here, but in reality it's like upwards a bit. Like, it's like the one at Fort Totten, which we haven't gotten to yet, but it'll make sense when I show it. So Forest Glen, again, C. Fort Totten, though, which is, I think, the next one, literally is, yeah. Fort Totten, like, you see, it's a bit far back. But you do have, again, another connecting track. But it skips the station, so you couldn't really use that track to help you terminate a red line train here in any way. If you need to send a red line train up to Greenbelt, you could use it, or a green line train down the red line, which has been done before. You could use it, but I don't think they really would. So, C tier. The connecting track is cool, but it couldn't really serve any help like it could for Farragut North. So, C tier. Franconia Springfield. That's an A tier. Any station that's active, most of the stations that are actively terminuses right now are going to get an A tier from me, because most of them have a similar design with tail tracks, crossover one end, but this one notably doesn't have a crossover on the other end for the tail track train, so you can't store them in either tail track. You can, if you needed a train in the tail tracks to switch tracks, if you're in the middle track, you're fine, because that acts as a connection to either track before the station. But if you're in the outer tracks, you have to go through the station on that track and then cross over, which isn't that big of a deal. But if you have a train in the platform here, you can't go around it. Yeah, but Largo has the same thing, so, and it still is having, you still have tail tracks, so A tier. Friendship Heights, B tier. We talked about before when I talked about Bethesda, but that is, yeah, crossover one end, island platform, B tier. Gallery Place. This one perplexes me, because this was the terminus for the yellow line. But for a while, from when the yellow line opened up until 91, when it was extended up to U Street. But there's no crossover here, and the next closest one is at Mount Vernon Square, which wasn't opened at the time, so I'm assuming they just single track down through here. But anyway, that aside, nowadays, next closest crossover is Mount Vernon Square's crossover. So, following my new logic that I'm going to be using from now forth, F tier. Oh yeah, and the red line one is Judiciary Square's crossover, so F tier. Ooh. Let me go back to Fort Totten, actually, because I forgot to talk about the red line platforms. The red line platforms do have a staggered crossover, but again, it's pretty far back, just like the green line one, so it just stays. Georgia Avenue, right down here, same thing. Not as Fort Totten, obviously, but, B tier. Island platform, crossover one end. Glenmont, this might be our first, or not our first, our first. Our first S tier. Wait, nope. I keep forgetting it has like provisions for extension, but it doesn't actually have like tail tracks that aren't yard access tracks. So basically copy paste Branch Avenue, but with a slightly smaller yard. Yard size doesn't really matter, like a yard's a yard, so A tier. Greenbelt. I lied. This might actually be our first S tier, which is... So you have the test track, obviously, that you could use to store a train in. You could use this track that doesn't really get used. Greenbelt Yard is huge. There's no crossover on the other end. So I think this is going to be A tier, just short of S. So if you're wondering why that didn't get an S tier, and why, again, Glenmont Branch Avenue don't get S, is I'm saving S for stations that specifically have a crossover on both ends, tail tracks and a yard. But if they have both tail tracks and a yard and a crossover, then they don't necessarily need one on both ends to be S, because that's already pretty dope. So, yeah. Greensboro, that's an F. Based on my new logic, if a station doesn't have a crossover, it can call its own, it's an F tier. And fun fact, I think I'm right in saying that Greensboro is the only only new Silver Line station, not like the ones that already existed before the line opened. Like, it's the only new one that doesn't have a crossover. Yeah. Because I think does Reston Town Center have one? I actually want to check that. I know that's like a thing I'm going to come back to later, definitely, but I just want to be sure of that I'm right about that, at least. This menu keeps popping up, and that's going to be annoying. Okay. Where is that? That would be... No, Reston Town Center doesn't have one. Huh. Well, no, it does, because the thing at Herndon, but Alright. We'll get to that at a certain point. Anyway, F tier. Grosvenor. That's another A tier. And I'll show why. Because it has a tail track, or pocket track, sorry. Doesn't have a crossover though. So you could use a tail track as a crossover coming from north, which is why the tail track stations get higher, because you could use it as a crossover, or you could use it as a tail track, or as a pocket track to reverse a train. So yeah, A tier. Herndon, which we were just over by when I was looking at Reston Town Center, funnily enough, gets, for me, lower than what I would actually give Reston Town Center, even though it gets the same rating. Because of this track right here, this third track here, you could use it as like a ladder to get trains over. Like if a train's coming from the north, you use this crossover here, and then you park it in here, driver switches ends, and then drive it back out. Trains coming from the south, you could use these crossovers here and here to turn it on either one of these two tracks. So it still works, I think, but because it kind of has a pocket track, it's not really a pocket track, it's more like a siding. I'm calling that A tier. Huntington. Huntington is, I keep forgetting, that's like right above here. Huntington is crossover and tail tracks. Where did I put a station with just, did I have any other station that had just 2 tail tracks? I think Ashburn had just 2, but it had a crossover in the other end too. So I might give that a B. Actually, no. A, because you still can store trains even though it just has 2. But yeah. Hydesville Crossing. I don't know. That's either a C, maybe a D. No, it's still a C. The crossover is just awkwardly located and it is just side platform. It still like has its own crossover. So I'm calling that a I'm calling that a C. I'm actually move that. No, that's a C. D would be a bit too harsh. Innovation Center. There is a crossover between Innovation Center and Dulles, if I know. Yeah, there's one here, and there's one here at Innovation Center. So you wouldn't really need to use this one. So I'm just gonna kind of like disregard it because it doesn't play that big of a role when you have one right here. So it would be better if it was closer, though. That would probably bump it to maybe an A from a B. But because it's still all the way over here, it doesn't really matter when you have this one. So typical station, B tier. Judiciary Square, C tier. Because if I'm remembering right, Judiciary Square has a crossover, but it's a side platform station. Yes, that's exactly what it is. So that is a C tier. Where'd I put Gallery Place? Am I? Oh yeah, I did put it in F. Okay, yeah. King Street. King Street, you can access the yard. And you could use the yard access tracks to turn a train. I think that bumps it up to a D, from a C, no, from an F, sorry. Because it doesn't really have its own crossover, because these crossovers are to access the yard, and not really for turning a train. So, and they're also, again, far back, so D. Landover, F. That's my guess, because if I'm remembering right, it doesn't have a crossover. Yep, it does not. That is an F. L'Enfant Plaza. Ooh. Okay, so the lower level has no crossover. The upper one does. And be a side platform. Average that, that's a D. Loudon Gateway. The most pointless station of all time. Has a crossover, but that's a bit far back. And yard access. Ooh. But only from the end that like no one would use. We still have to reverse out to get to the yard. So I don't think it'd be fair to put that in A to the other stations. So actually, I mean, it is a kind of a distance from the station to get into the Dulles yard. So like, you're on the approach tracks for quite a bit. So I think I'll just stick that down in C with the other stations that have their island platform crossover slightly too far back, like Federal Triangle or what's the other one? Like what was the other one? I had Forest Glen, yeah, and Hydesville Crossing, obviously. McLean suffers from the Silver Line problem that you're going to see a lot of, and that problem is that the new Silver Line stations, their crossovers are usually a bit far back from the platform. Not that far, but usually just far enough where it's a bit annoying. So that bumps it down to a C for me. McPherson Square. That's the station. That's like the Farragut North connecting track station. This one, yeah. So you could also turn a red line train here if you really wanted to by using this as a crossover and then doing something like that. I mean, because Farragut North's an A, I think because you can do that, that bumps it up to a B. So, yeah. Medical Center. B tier. We talked about before when I mentioned Bethesda, but yeah. Same old, same old. Metro Center. F. Horrible terminus, but you would never close this for a shut. Well, you would. You'd close at one level max for the shutdown, and you'd single track for anything else because you need to keep the station open. Yeah, no crossovers on either end. Minnesota Avenue, another F. Basically, same thing as Benning Road, but at ground level, I think. Yeah. Morgan Boulevard, B. Copy-paste of Addison Road, except modern style, so. Mount Vernon Square. Crossover and pocket track. That's tough. I don't think there was anything else I mentioned that had both. That would be that's an A. I mean, Farragut North only has but I mean, it puts some decent heavy yards with it, because like my S tier is pretty. I feel like you should have a yard if you're going to be an S. Yard and tail tracks, so A. Navy Yard. Yet another B tier. One crossover island platform. What else is new? Naylor Road. Oh my goodness, would you look at that? It's the same thing. New Carrollton. This is the first S. This is the first S, and I know this for a fact. Because New Carrollton has these tracks right here, which are actually tail tracks, and you can store trains here. And they're separate from the yard access tracks. And you have a crossover here. Granted, it's only one direction, but still a crossover. And a crossover here. And the yard, obviously. That's an S. Let me move it up. S tier. Noma. Noma gets a C. Actually, no. Noma gets an A. Because Brentwood Yard. But it is a bit far back, so you know what? I think what I'm gonna do is that the yard makes up for it. I was gonna deduct points for the crossover being too far back, and take it out from B to a C, but the yard makes up for it, definitely. So it's either a B or an A. I think, I'm gonna look at what I have in B. I think it'd be unfair to put a station that has a yard in B. So Noma gets an A. And looking at that, I might bump up Eisenhower Avenue. Even though it has no crossovers, it still has yard access, which you could use for a crossover. So I might actually bump that up to D. That'd be like there. North Bethesda, F. Because it has nothing, I think. Yeah, it has nothing. Pentagon. Hate to say this one, but this is another F. But they are actually there was a study that Metro made that said they're considering putting in a pocket track at the south end of Pentagon. So if that's built, I'd have to redo this list first of all, but that would bump the rating for Pentagon up to at least to an A, similar to Fort Totten. So, because there's nothing right now, and right now the track isn't built, it's an F. Pentagon City, side platform, crossover, C. Potomac Avenue has nothing, I think. Yep. So that is AF. Potomac Yard. Oh my god. Menu keeps popping up. Potomac Yard. Crossover side platform. C. National Airport. A. Because the pocket track or not is the platform, so that, but it's a great spot to turn a train. Like, it is a stellar terminal. Reston Town Center. Whatever I gave Herndon, take 1 point away from that, because it's the same like track section we're talking about, except it's a lot closer to Herndon, so it's almost Herndon's, like, but not quite, because it still is kind of far back. And you do also have the Wheelie Reston pocket track here. Even though those don't belong to this station per se, they're both pocket tracks, so I'm going to make an exception here. So Reston Town Center, and because they're pocket tracks, they're a lot longer, so they stretch further away from Herndon and Wheelie Reston, respectively. So what did I give Herndon? Herndon I gave an A, so that means this would get a B. That doesn't sound right. I think a C would be better, because they're pretty far from the station. Rhode Island Avenue, Brentwood, another C. This one hurts me, because this station used to be was the original terminus for Metro, back when the first Red Line opened in '76, but it sucked at being a terminus, because this crossover is so far back, and all the trains are coming in from this end, so they have to go in here, and then go all the way past it, and then reverse. So, yeah, C tier. Rockville has nothing. I know that for a fact, but I'm going to check anyway, because I could be wrong, but no, I am not. Rockville is a F, because nothing. Roslyn, another F. This one sucks, because like Pentagon, it's a transfer station, and it has a stacked layout, but you really can't turn any trains here, because there's no crossovers. Shady Grove. This might be our second S, if I'm remembering right. Our second and final S. Because Shady Grove Yard is huge, and it does have... They use these tracks as tail tracks. So you know what? There's so many crossovers here. I'm bumping this. There's 3 whole crossovers. So Shady Grove gets an S in my eyes. And that means I might bump the other yard stations here. Like, well, Greenbelt and Branch Avenue don't really have... Did they? Let me check. Greenbelt and Branch Avenue, where are they? There's Lemont, so that means Greenbelt would be like... Greenbelt... No, because they both had these, and just one of them, so no. Shady Grove gets bumped because crossovers, and a lot of them. Even if there's no way, because they can actually help you get around them more, because it has 3 of them, which is crazy. Anyway, I just said like the same thing 3 times. Okay. Shaw, I think that's another F, if I remember. Yes. The Mount Vernon Square tail track gets close, but it's Mount Vernon Square's tail track. So, Silver Spring. A. Think of Mount Vernon Square, but with a staggered crossover and a because it has the pocket track, so A. Smithsonian, same thing as Federal Triangle, so C. Actually might bump that down to, no, not bumping it down to D. Southern Avenue, another B tier station, one crossover, island platform. C might be more full than B at this point. That's surprising me. Spring Hill, crossover is too far from the station for it to be anything but a C. Yep, that's a C. Stadium Armory, F. It has a tail track. However, no, it's actually going to be a D. Because it has a tail track, but when that tail track is literally on the other side of the river, it's not a good terminus. That's a D. Suitland. This is either an F or a B if I remember right. I think it's a F. Yes, it's an F. Tacoma. Tacoma is a Tacoma has these. So it's actually like this crossover is so far back, it's a D. Like the other ones are far back, but this one is this one is really far back from it. So that gets major points. Tenleytown is nothing, I think. Yes, it has nothing. So F. Twinbrook is another B tier, I think. Is it? Yes, it is. Tyson's is another B tier. It's the only Silver Line station here, I think, so far, that is the Island Platform 1 crossover. The crossover is actually close to the platforms. So, B. U Street is another B, I think. Right? Yes, another B. Union Station has this one that's like halfway between Noma. So that's getting a C. Van Dorn, another B, I'm pretty sure. Right? Yeah. Van Dorn is another B. And Van Ness is another B. So now the B and C tiers are actually on par. Huh. Vienna. I have to give that an A because that's tail tracks, just like Huntington, except more above ground and actually not that similar. Well, in track layout at least it is. So that's another A. Virginia Square, F. I'm pretty sure. Right? Yeah, F. Waterfront, another F. Yep, that's nothing. West Falls Church. This, I'm going to call it and say this is an S. Yeah. Crossover, though it's a bit far back. Tail track, or not tail track, pocket track, sorry. And yard access with multiple crossovers. So, that's our final S. West Hyattsville, another F. Doesn't have anything. Yep. Wheaton is a B, I think. Yep, another B. Wheelie Reston is an A because it has a pocket track. But wait, no, I have to go all the way down here to the inset. I Keep forgetting about that. Right? Willie Reston is a... Is it? Yes. Willie Reston is a B. And Woodley Park Zoo Adams Morgan, our final station, is... Or no, did I say B for Willie Reston? I'm stupid. It's an A. What am I talking about? Woodley Park is an F, if I remember right. So, this is how good all the metro stations would be at being terminals, in my opinion. Yeah, this is actually a lot better than I thought it would be. If you tried doing this with BART, you'd have a whole lot more Fs. So, yeah. I found this list on TierMaker, so big ups to whoever was the one that made the template. I couldn't find the original. Oh, is this it? I think that might be it. Yes, Adam Bressler here. Thank you for making this tier list. But yeah, that's going to be it for this very different video. I have been the Autistic Transit Fan, and I'm signing off until the next one. I'll see y'all in the future when I'm talking about probably Norway.